Secret in Shadow.
Donut Lord, can I bring some of my clothes to Shadow?
There's an uncertainty to that question. The hedgehog holding up a certain baseball jersey that he had already loved to tear into. It would have usually worried Tom that Sonic was ready to give his friends things. After all, as soon as Knuckles and Tails had begun living with them, Sonic seemed eager to share anything with them except food, but Maddie assured him that that was just a sibling thing. The fact that it was that particular jersey, however, and a new name, Shadow, tipped Tom off that maybe something was off.
But buddy, he's the same age as you, cause he's probably bigger than you are. Human kids aren't hedge.
You're right. Never mind. It was silly.
And like that, before Tom could talk about another option, Sonic was off like a shot. Yep, definitely something was off. They quickly had all three kids mentioning Shadow, indicating that the new friend of Sonic's had been expertly shoved into the friendship circle via the blue blurs, fast talking no doubt. Tails seemed a little wary of Shadow, only mentioning him if Sonic did. That was quickly becoming normal. Tails didn't go outside as often as Sonic, nor did he chat as much to people. Knuckles, on the other hand, obviously didn't trust Shadow. Whenever Sonic said he was going to see him, Knuckles either told him to be careful or insisted he'd go with him. No in between. Tom honestly couldn't blame him after, yet still, something felt off. Shadow, as a person, was just that. It wasn't like the other kids who were at baseball games or in clubs with the boys or you saw around town that the kids would wave to. All Tom and Maddie had to go off of was Sonic's vague talk about this stranger. It was worrisome.
Maybe we should tell them to invite him to dinner. You did say he said Shadow was the same age, right?
Maddie asked, sitting on the edge of the bed.
But I'm not sure that Shadow is the type to accept an invitation. Sonic did say he invited him to play before to look for himself.
In fact, Sonic had come home with ears drooping and a lowered tail. Even Tails, pegging behind his older brother, seemed sad that this new friend had not wanted to play with his super awesome robot coffee maker he'd made for Maddie's birthday.
Well, no harm in trying. I'll bake some cookies. No kid can say no to cookies.
Turned out that no kid could in fact say no to Maddie's cookies. Sonic zoomed around in a small circle in front of Shadow's makeshift home, his tail going as fast as his feet. The black hedgehog watched him with heavily lidded eyes, the look that was tired but not quite a glare. Watching without ever moving his head, he watched specifically the way Sonic was blowing dirt onto his front doorstep with his speeding feet. The shed was not the best in terms of a shelter. It had most likely been white at some point, possibly with a little red door. Now it looked like the ugly stick had hit it full force without mercy. The plaster on the outside had cracked, vines growing from them in big, bushy clumps all the way up to the ramshackle, crooked roof. It was missing some ties, and had been chipped with them cracking and sloping halfway down their original places. Where there might have been a door, there was now only a part of a latch on the wall clinging uselessly to a bit of bike chain. Instead, Knuckles had helped Shadow take a big piece of sheet metal from the scrapyard and rest it right in the empty doorway. A stone statue that looked a little like a bloated dog pig thing stood guard outside a few feet away, one ear having fallen into ruin. This, for better or worse, is where Shadow made his home. He swept the front steps often, remembering Mary liked to sweep. Maria, in her blue dress and her hair swept up in a messy bun, she smiled at him while she worked, telling him that when she was done she was gonna darn his socks for him again, because really, do all line hedgehogs wear out their socks so fast? The dark hedgehog opened his eye to watch Sonic. Yes, they did.
I hope you aren't expecting me to wear a suit or anything faker.
Oh, Shad, you know I'd never ask you to do that.
Sonic laughed, carefree and happy.
Better not.
Maddie blinked in confusion at the empty stoop he had opened the door to. Now, Ding Dong Ditch was normal in any small town, the local teenagers not having much to do. However, if you were Maddie Wachowski, you would recognize after a year and a half of raising an anthropomorphic alien hedgehog a certain kind of crackle in the air. Super speed had a trace about it, like how you would feel sliding your socks against a carpet but around your whole body.
Sonic,
She questioned the crackly air.
I thought you were with Tom in the attic getting your friend's beanbag red.
It took 2 seconds for the black and red flash to register in her mind before she could clearly see him. He was smaller than Sonic, brownish black with dark red stripes streaking down his quills. On his feet were some red and white roller skates with a yellow Velcro strap keeping them on his paws. On his gloves were 2 large bangles, not unlike Sonic's golden rings but way bigger. On his chest, a white splash of fur blossomed. After a moment, the veterinarian's mouth upturned into a smile.
Shadow.
She asked. The black hedgehog nodded, his quills bouncing once before he crossed his arms and looked away from her like an angry cat. She got the feeling that talking wasn't really his thing. Sonic had a heart attack when he'd heard Maddie shout from downstairs that Shadow's here. On one hand, she sounded considerably more calm than he imagined. On the other, he was more worried about Tom. Hopefully the cop would keep his hands to himself and off the tranquilizer darts and the wooden ladles. If it came to those, then Sonic was out of ideas.
Sonic, show Shadow where the bathroom is, would you?
By now Sonic knew that to be part of a group of code phrases meaning "can you give us a moment? I need to freak out and I don't want witnesses." Tom was freaking out. He had wanted him to freak out.
Dude, you were supposed to wait.
Sonic sighed, flopping on his bed dramatically.
Well, how was I supposed to know you didn't tell them?
Shadow snapped, his ears down defensively.
What was I supposed to say? Can I invite a friend for dinner? Oh, by the way, he's another space hedgehog. Trust me, they are like birds. Once they latch, they stay.
Yeah, that's how they got me and Knuckles. Call it spontaneous adoption.
Tails grinned, marching in with his old Game Gear that he'd found one morning in the basement.
Wanna play Velocity the Mongoose? With me, Shadow, I got all the way up to level 14 this time.
Tails had been what Shadow could only describe as worried towards him. Yet that wasn't surprising when the poor fox had embarrassed himself in front of Shadow when the two first met. The black hedgehog truly couldn't blame him though for the accusations that he was a ghost. He had been lurking around a graveyard like a creeper, Sonic said.
You're going to have to show me how. I don't believe I've ever played games quite like these before.
He regarded the tiny plastic box in Tails' hands with confusion.
Where are the pieces?
That's Old Man Shadow for you.
Sonic called. The dark hedgehog had forgotten he was there.
Quite faker.
Maddie had learned over a lot of intense thinking sessions during yoga that she liked doing things with her hands, whether it had been helping a sick animal, raising her foot behind her head, or cooking. It always gave her a sort of nice calming feeling in her chest. After having Tails attached to her side at most hours of the day, she learned that it helped him too. She guessed it was the sounds. Those big, beautiful ears could pick up more sounds than anyone in their family barring Ozzy could, so autonomous sensory meridian response was very clearly on the table for the Shay Fox cub. Tails watched her even now, having used his tails to skip the staircase entirely as soon as he heard the oven click on. His sign eyes watched her shake the pasty into the pot, wide with wonder. Another part she figured he appreciated was the craft of it all, having a knack for taking things apart and putting them together again. His first night over he had taken apart Sonic's alarm clock, sitting in the middle of a bunch of cogs and wires, putting it right back together again as calmly as if he was riding a bicycle. Sonic had watched him, cheering him on. That had cemented him, for her at least, as part of the family. She had some homemade tomato sauce left over from pizza last night. The cub stepped back as soon as she took it out, looking at her expectantly.
Tails, could you get your kid knife and chop up some onions for me? Ready, please.
I wanna help Shadow.
Maddie jumped. She had heard the black hedgehog coming. His head barely made it 2 inches above Tails, looking at the spaghetti in the stove curiously like it reminded him of something.
You aren't going to put Gross hot sauce or anything on it, are you?
He sniffed, his ears going down.
No, just pasta sauce and some onion. Maybe a little oregano.
She handed him some bread.
Would you like to slice them up and butter it for me, please?
Shadow took it as if the bread would shatter in a million pieces. A long pause, then a nod. Maddie smiled at him, ruffling his ear the way she would any of the kids as she passed.
Thank you.
She said. Shadow looked at Maddie. Really look. Mary had said to him one day up on the ark hiding under the blankets and reading magazines that one could surmise what a grown-up was talking about by just looking at how they carried themselves when they said stuff. Like how Gerald had been worried over her medical reports day in and day out by the slump of his shoulders and the twitching of his mustache, or how Maria, who was slowly morphing into an adult herself, was sad whenever she said she was alright. He could tell by the slope of her eyes, the tremble of her lip, the droop of her voice. Maria was convinced she remembered Earth in some capacity, told him as much in the darkest hours when she couldn't stop coughing enough to sleep. She couldn't get through a single sentence without a cough, but she soldiered on. And that's all he wanted to remember her as, a soldier. He looked at Maddie and thought about what he wanted to remember her as, Sonic's mother, most likely, wearing the same color as the sky around her waist, floating around the kitchen humming the Friends theme. Shadow smiled slightly, placing the onions on the table and picking up the kid knife. Blue. Probably Sonic's he was handed. He was about to argue that he had used knives before but thought better of it. After all, no reason to alarm them in case they decided to call any authorities that would alert Don. Shadow was sick of running. Once the bread was sliced, he poked his head into the fridge to find the butter, which he was told was on the top shelf. Dinner was ready. Knuckles perked up on the couch at the call, his snout twitching. So they finally did something with those yellow worms of wheat and the sloppy red mud they live in. He knew they weren't alive, but it was just easier to think of them that way. His brain would hurt trying to put it all together if he thought of it the other way. Shadow padded out to the living room carrying a plate of buttered bread. His skates had been left by the door. Knuckles has already thoroughly inspected them. They met eyes.
The echidna.
Shadow put down the plate. He shook his hands out, water droplets slightly scattering.
What a pleasant surprise!
Knuckles snarled, relaxing against the wall easily. The black hedgehog was really bothering him recently. Sonic had met Shadow under less savory circumstances, having found him stopping a car from crashing. That kind of strength was impressive, Knux had to admit, but not as strong as him. Sonic came in, interrupting the looming fight. His tail was going at 20 miles per hour, the green eyes bright with joy. The two edger animals turned away from the brightness, opting to continue their argument at a later date.
Oh my gosh, I cannot believe that all of my friends are finally in the same place.
Sonic gasped.
It's awesome. Shadow, you sit next to me. Tails goes here. Knux, you get next to Maddie.
Once the hedgehog was satisfied with where his family and friends were seated, he zipped to his seat. Shadow rolled his eyes to himself, which to anyone looking would look half as fond as the black hedgehog felt privately. Tom sighed.
Well, Shadow, hoping for the start of wonder friendship. I'm digging everybody.
Shadow watched out of the corner of his eye as Sonic basically ate like a monster. Knuckles and Tails at least used forks and spoons.
Hey, Shadow.
Sonic asked, stuffing his face full of noodles.
Thanks for coming over.
Shadow, in a rare moment of vulnerability, smiled and ate his bread roll.
Maria would be proud!